Hello, I'm Lyn McLean, Director of EMR Australia, and today I'm talking to Mary Redmayne, Dr Mary Redmayne, who has just published a new paper called Redefining Electrosensitivity, a new literature-supported model. Welcome, Mary.
Hi, Lyn.
Thanks
for having me along today.
It's my pleasure, and it's lovely to talk to you. So, Mary, I'm very excited to see this paper because we have a lot of people in our network who have a lot of problems with electromagnetic radiation. They experience symptoms, they experience health problems. So I think they'll be very interested to hear what you have to say today. So what I wanted to start by asking you is your term electromagnetic illness, or EMI, as you call it in the paper. This is a new term that you've coined in the paper. So can you tell us what this actually is?
Okay, well, it's an interesting term that has been discussed in the electrohypersensitive community, both the researchers and sufferers, recently in quite extensive group emails, which just coincidentally happened to be happening while I was developing this model with my colleague. And so a lot of different names were being tossed around for electrohypersensitivity because many of those who suffer don't feel it's a good name. And one of the ones that was recommended was electromagnetic illness, and that was by Magda Havas, and who's a researcher. And it seemed very popular with many of the people. So I discussed it a bit further with her, and she thought it would be fine to apply to the way we're dealing with it in the paper, which is actually a little broader than what's normally thought of as electrohypersensitivity. So, yes, it'll become clearer as we talk, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you. That's good, because sensitivity to me is something that maybe some people would experience. We tend to think of some people as being sensitive to sunlight or peanuts or whatever, but illness is something that affects us all. So would one way of looking at this be to say that electromagnetic illness is something that could affect all of us?
Now that's a good question. I think I suspect many people are sufficiently resilient not to be affected. So what we say here is that there's a big emphasis in this model on the individual's capacity to repair any damage done to their body and to maintain homeostasis, which is a term that means that normally our body stays in balance. It has a method of staying in balance called homeostasis. And if your body is not repairing regularly and being treated properly in a healthy way, then that homeostasis can go out of balance, and that'll leave you more susceptible to a variety of things. And one of these, we believe, is to electromagnetic fields. So the electrohypersensitivity is for the people that don't have such strong homeostasis and personal balance in their way their body's functioning.
Well, that makes a lot of sense too, because I suppose we only develop any illness when our bodies are a little bit out of balance. If we have strong immunity and we're healthy, good diet and so forth, then we're a lot more impervious to a lot of problems, aren't we?
Yeah. You see, what we actually say in the paper is that we anticipate individual repair capacity is both dynamic and inextricably linked to bodily awareness and responses, all interweaving with the autonomic nervous system, which is and that's what current research is showing anyway, that our repair capacity is woven in with the autonomic nervous system like that. So, and the research at the moment currently shows that the human system is completely integrated. It's a mind and body interconnect.
Well,
so we're building that all into this model.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense to me too. So you talked about the autonomic nervous system. Now, is that something that is affected by all health problems, or are you saying that this is specific to electromagnetic illness?
Before I go any further, I need to make it clear I'm not medically trained. Okay, my training was epidemiology, and my colleague is fully aware of the autonomic nervous system and works with it all the time in her practice with people with problems like electrohypersensitivity or any sort of autonomic nervous system imbalance. So I'll be cautious how I answer your question, but it's certainly not just electrohypersensitivity that causes involves the autonomic nervous system. Our autonomic nervous system is part of our nervous system and is active in many ways all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I guess it's
autonomic is basically that it's not the bits we're aware of happening. It's happening sort of a bit like automatically. It's not the things we make happen. So even if we hear that someone's being told that their electrohypersensitivity is just nocebo, which we've given a newer name to, by the way, it isn't anything to do with just. It's a perfectly normal unconscious reaction if the body's feeling threatened. If you're feeling threatened about something, then your body is programmed to autonomically react. It's not something you choose.
Right. So it's an automatic reaction in a way.
It is. But also, it's a bit confusing because also it'll react the same way. The autonomic reaction will also react like that to a real threat. So it's, you can have real threats with fairly little response. You can have threats that are concerning you, but you can't see them, that will also have autonomic. It's not an easy solution that works just one way or the other. The whole topic has been there's been this huge elephant in the room of the way it's been discussed, with very sides taken by, say, the World Health Organization, who give very placating words but imply that it's just all in the brain, which that it's psychological, and there's researchers and the people who suffer it that say no, we can show that it isn't, and it's far too black and white. The whole thing is very, very, very integrated, and we really hope that this model will bring this discussion together to acknowledge the complexity of it.
Right. So the effects occur whether they're psychological or whether they're physical and not psychological at all. The effects are still there. Yeah.
But in fact, from the research and from what most people report, it seems that the physical response to, or physical or like some mental responses like nervousness or anxiety can happen without even being aware of the source or of the existence of a possibility of any effect from electromagnetic fields. It's quite normal that people get symptoms well before they have ever heard of electrohypersensitivity.
Yes, that's what I've heard too. We have one lady in our network, and I should say at this point that I have a network of many thousands of people who are interested in this issue and also many of them affected by this issue. And we have one lady who can tell when she's driving in the car. She can tell when she's coming to a mobile phone tower, not because she knows it's there, but because she can feel the effects on her body before she can even see it.
I know there are several people I've spoken to that say the same thing, and it can be a new area and they haven't seen it. So they don't even subconsciously know it's there.
That's right. So what kind of effects are we talking about in electromagnetic illness? What symptoms are you covering in this description?
Just the electrohypersensitivity first, which is where we began with this paper, was trying to get a better model for electrohypersensitivity. Symptoms. Well, there's a lot of very well-known symptoms. So if it's your electrohypersensitive audience that are listening, they won't need me to be telling them. But headache is one of the ones that's most prevalent. In fact, someone in France just yesterday was telling me with research he's doing that it's about 98% of EHS sufferers in Australia and France have headaches as one of their symptoms. And so there's headaches and dizziness and fatigue, pressure in the head. Some people feel nausea. So it affects concentration. And it really does a huge list. So I won't go through all of them. Yeah. But when we're looking at electromagnetic illness, which is, I need to explain our model a bit, I think, before we go any further.
That sounds very good. Mary, you're fading a little bit too, so if I could just...
Oh, okay, I'll speak up.
That would be great.
So tell me if I'm not speaking loudly enough. Sorry, just, whoops. So we've made a model. Now, models are always limited, so this isn't going to be answering all the questions, but we feel that there's a few years ago, I presented a model at the World Conference on World Public Health Congress in Melbourne about this, and I had developed a model that just had categories of what caused people's EHS, but I discussed it later with a colleague in Australia, and this is what has led to this new model, because as she pointed out, illness really doesn't tend to fall into categories. Things run more on continua. So we felt that there's a linear somatic awareness. Now, by that we mean awareness of your body, of how your body is reacting to anything, but in this case, electromagnetic fields. So, for instance, I'll give you a fairly everyday example, not to do with electromagnetic fields. If you're going up the stairs a long way and you're aware that your heart is beating faster, that is reasonable somatic awareness. If you're just sitting at your desk and you're aware of your heart rate, then that's fairly sensitive somatic awareness. Okay, so people have different levels of somatic awareness. And the same we're proposing goes for awareness of their body reacting to electromagnetic fields. Then going across this, we have a non-linear somatic response. Now, somatic bodily response continuum, which is how your body responds to electromagnetic fields. So on the one hand, we have people who may be rather low in their awareness, but high in the actual response.
You mean the symptom there, Mary?
So if somebody has no symptoms, they feel no symptoms and have no, or they might have symptoms, but they have no awareness of its cause from electromagnetic fields. So wait a minute, so that, don't want to confuse myself. They have no awareness of its cause, but there may be quite a high bodily response. So that can be unfortunate, because then you may not do anything to try and remove yourself from the exposure because you're not aware of it affecting you. But if, for instance, I was talking to a relative a couple of years ago at a Christmas party, and he said something about his phone, and he said, "Oh, I only ever text." So I said, "Oh, why is that?" he didn't know this was my area of research. He's a fairly distant relative. And he said, oh, everyone knows if you put a phone by your head, it gives you a headache. And I said, well, that's great that you know, but a lot of people don't. So many people get headaches from using their phones, but don't actually realize it's the phone causing it. So he was automatically taking steps not to use the phone by his head, and in that way was keeping his homeostasis in better balance and allowing his body to keep building capacity to stay healthy by taking avoidance steps. If you're not aware of what exposure is causing your problem, then it's very hard to avoid it. So this is one of the key things about what we're talking about, is that if the people with electrohypersensitivity, they're highly aware of exposure, the electromagnetic exposure at one end, but becoming less and less aware as you go down that scale of what's actually causing it. And their body is quite responsive, and right through to being very responsive, giving them many symptoms.
So would a way of looking at that be to say that there are a lot of people out there in society who are maybe mobile phone users and who are maybe getting headaches, but just not making the connection between the headaches and the phone use?
Sure. Yes.
Or again, there might be lots of people working in offices where they're sitting in front of a Wi-Fi computer. They're feeling symptoms. Maybe they're feeling concentration problems or memory problems, or some of those other symptoms that are associated with this kind of exposure. But they just think, oh, well, I'm getting old, or I'm tired, or I've been working for 6 hours already.
And those things may be true. I mean, yes. It's not that every time you get a headache, it's to do with there are lots of things that cause the same symptoms, which is why it's been such a difficult thing to get accepted over the years. But you're right. It could be the screen or the Wi-Fi, or it could be something else. But it's good to be aware that that is one of the options.
Right. So it's good to test.
Then you can try it out. Yes, yeah. That's right. You can try it out. So that's one of the ways of helping yourself, is to be aware of your body and how it's responding to its environment in all sorts of ways. When you walk along a busy street, do you start coughing? And is it probably the fumes, or maybe the pollen? But, you can come up with some possibilities to try and avoid that problem. Whereas if you're not aware of how your body's responding in different locations or circumstances, that makes it much harder to identify and do something about it.
That's right. That makes perfect sense to me. I've talked to so many people over the years who have symptoms, and what comes to mind is one lady who had symptoms, headaches again, and she had headaches in different parts of her head. So one was at the top of her head, one was on her forehead, and another kind of headache was to the side of her head. And she could actually tell by the type of headache that she had what she was being exposed to. So there was the Wi-Fi headache, there was the Bluetooth headache, and I think the third one was a decked phone headache. So she was very, I guess, what you'd call aware, had a lot of awareness about what was happening in her body, but also she'd been able to connect that to the specific types of signal. So I thought that was an interesting example.
That's great, because it puts her in a position to actually avoid those exposures if possible.
Exactly.
So, for instance, in classrooms, some children have problems in classrooms. And if they're aware what's causing their headache, they can at least sit in a part of the classroom away from the Wi-Fi router and with no students' computers close to them, and preferably only using a wired one themselves. By the way, I want to say something about these wired computers. You keep hearing about people should use wired computers. It's really important when doing that. If you've got wired, not Wi-Fi, you've got wired, then you also need to put your device in flight mode. or turn off the internet, because, turn off the wireless connection, because otherwise it's not doing any use. You may be getting it through the wire, but your computer is still giving out the microwave. So you need to put the device into flight mode as well.
That's right. Oh, yes, that's really good advice for people. And our big problem here in Australia, and I don't know whether you have that in New Zealand, is not just the computers themselves, but it's the equipment that connects us to the new NBN network that we have. So the new modems that are coming in as part of that connection are absolutely pumping out radiation. And what people don't realize is that when they turn the button that says Wi-Fi off, they are not, in most cases, turning off the radiation from that modem. So I'm always trying to get information out to people. So
I had an issue with this with my last modem, where I thought I had turned it off, but there was still something. And in the end, it turned out I had to ring the provider. This has seemed a bit dodgy. I had to ring the provider. The provider logged me onto a website and told me what my password was. And then let me do the setting to turn off the Wi-Fi on this website. So it couldn't be done from the computer or the router itself. But I don't know how Australia deals with that. But you do sometimes have to get it done through the company that you're with.
Well, in many cases, it can't be done at all. You certainly can't get that information from the companies. It will depend on the providers, but we have radiation-free equipment that connects to NBN.
Yeah, no, depends depends who you talk to. I talked to 2 or 3 different engineers at the company, and finally one told me how to deal with it.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Well, I guess that's a message for people to perhaps think about what symptoms they're experiencing and then start to look for an association with what they could be exposed to, whether it's electromagnetic or whether it's food or whether it's, as you said, fumes crossing a road. But encouraging people to put 2 and 2 together, I think, is important so that they can then be more in charge of their own health.
Yes. So in one of these, the sort of final message in this paper is really saying that it's up to us to build our capacity for repair, and our capacity provides the necessary energy to build resilience. And what we want is to be resilient so that we can take part in society. It's miserable for people who have to always be away from all these signals because they're everywhere. You really need to be able to live in society. And even though it's sensible to be cautious, very cautious, and it should be done with some assistance if possible, just gradually building up your resilience so that you can cope with little bit more until you get to the capacity that you can cope with. But at least with luck, it should be more than some people who live out in the outback somewhere because they have no capacity to cope with it. And so that's really what we're hoping, and have suggested ways to go about doing that.
I think thank you. I think it's important for people to realize that it is possible too, because so many people think that they don't have any options and that they can't.
Yeah.
They can't recover. So how do you suggest that people can build that resilience?
Right. Well, in our paper, there's an online supplement which is free to anybody to look at. The paper, unfortunately, we didn't have any funding, so we couldn't afford to put it on the website. It costs thousands. But the supplementary material is free, and it has some of the suggestions in that. So if you people try Googling Redmayne, which is my name, Redmayne, and Reddel, Reddel, and the title, which is Redefining Electrosensitivity, a New Literature-Supported Model. You'll find the paper, and on that page you'll find the link to the free bit. So I won't go over what we've got in that. But in the paper as well, there's always to use the normal sensible suggestions about how to reduce your exposure, which I expect most of your listeners will know. Like I'll go over, and maybe at the very end I'll because those are really important things.
Yes.
But I'll say quickly now that I can have a chance at the end too. So basic rules: when children start, what time restrictions you have. Having no screens in bedrooms ever at all, unless the child hasn't got a study space, in which case there should be a time limit when it comes out of the room. No phone use by the head at all, or against the head. No device storage on the body or in the hand. And those are fairly basic rules for absolutely everybody, not just for sensitive or people who think they all know they are sensitive. Just a standard health and safety guidelines to using transmitting devices. For people who already have a problem, then I'd recommend turning everything off at night, preferably not having any wireless equipment of their own in the house. But if they need it for some reason, then turning it all off at night. Saves a bit of power too, which is nice.
They'll need to turn it off at the power point, won't they? Because a lot of people
Yes.
think things are off when you're actually not. So,
yes.
Yeah.
The router is off if you turn it off at the router. If you turn it off at the wall, you can turn it off at the wall, but the only problem with that now is that you need to be aware that your landline won't, in fact, even if you turn it off at the router, the landline won't ring.
Well, turning it off, yeah. But our problem is that turning it off at the router doesn't turn it off in most cases. So
Okay.
unless people are using our radiation-free equipment, which means you don't have to turn it off and you've still got a landline.
So yes, turning things off at the switch, and you save a lot of power because of all the various chargers and things. You might need to leave a phone recharging, but that can be in another part of the house. Yes. Try and keep the sleeping space particularly completely clear at night, because that's when our body is doing its repairing and recharging and trying to keep that homeostasis in balance. So especially nighttime is important.
That's true. And just as an aside, I talk to people all the time, and they're very concerned about radiation. Usually they're concerned about somebody else's radiation, not their own sources of radiation. And I say to them, have you got Wi-Fi? And they say, yes. Oh, but it's okay, we turn it off at nighttime. And I am thinking, well, that's good, but it means that it's only safe when it's not being used. In other words, when these people are actually using technology, when they're sitting next to their Wi-Fi router, or they've got their Wi-Fi computer in front of them, and their wireless mouse and their wireless keyboard and their wireless phone next to them, they're absolutely being radiated, and by such a lot of signal, by so many signals from so many sources.
I think that's the key thing, is that there's so many signals, and anyone's body may only be particularly sensitive to one of them, but if more you've got, the more likely there's going to be something that's your body responds to.
That's right, because body responds to different frequencies, and some people respond more to some frequencies than others.
I'd like to get back to what we were talking about before, though, about things we can do. So as well as just those standard things, one of the goals is to improve the ability of our body to repair, which is related to this getting a good sleep that's uninterrupted. And it's particularly important for a well-functioning homeostasis, and it's necessary for this particular, that it's related to the immune system. So paying attention to gut health is important, incorporating regular mind-body resilience activities. And these things are likely to help regulate responses in your tissues and your awareness. So just basically really being aware of actively staying healthy, not just imagining it's going to happen. So in terms of the mind-body resilience activities, for instance, things like taking regular exercise, which I think with lockdown more people are doing because they feel shut in. So now they want to exercise where they didn't before, which is really a great side thing from that. Journaling with a pen and paper, actually doing something that takes a bit of time and isn't in front of a screen, or story writing or whatever, using a pen and paper. Maintaining a healthy and balanced diet. These are all really key things to having good health. And then I also find something important for me is just taking time to sit. No TV, no radio, no music, nothing. Just sit outside and enjoy a bit of wind in your face. Except at the moment here, we're absolutely deafened by cicadas if I sit outside, which isn't so great. But just sitting and observing or just relaxing with your eyes shut, it's just really therapeutic just to sit. And so few people do it. And I know how hard it is for young mothers to do because I was there once. I'll tell you how busy I used to be. One day, I would just flopped on the couch and sat. And my son of about 7 came and looked at me and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm sitting." "What else are you doing?" "Nothing." And he looked terribly worried. He just couldn't fathom it at all. But so I do know what it's like being a busy mum, but try to take time to just sit. It really is good.
What I notice is that the opportunities that people have to sit and do nothing now, they're not taking, because what I see is that some device pops its little head into the space that they've created in their day, and instead of sitting and looking at nature or looking at the person across the table at them in the restaurant, that what they're doing is they're on their device. So I think,
well, it really is quite addictive. It's a hard thing. There's been some research that showed if you have the device, say even if you're on your computer, if you have your phone out of direct reach from sitting down, so off the desk, and somewhere you have to stand up to get it, and out of sight, so covered with something or behind something, you're far less likely to keep checking it. So having ready access and being able to see it both increase the number of times it's checked enormously. So that's an easy way to try and train yourself to not be so tied to it.
That's a good suggestion. Going back to these ways of getting the body to improve homeostasis, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is nature too. Spending time in nature, I've read, is incredibly important in health in general, but also in counteracting things like anxiety, which spending a lot of time on these devices can increase. So would you agree that that's a useful?
Absolutely. I should have spelled it out. I thank you, Lyn, because for me, going for a walk and just sitting are both linked with observing nature. And I love just observing nature. I love watching tiny things like just ants. You can sit and watch ants for ages. They're so interesting. And one time we sat and watched ants, and they were coming in and out of their hole, and each time an ant came out, they were carrying a little stick and putting it on a pile. It's like they had a rubbish pile that they were taking stuff to. It was amazing. So you see wonderful things just by sitting and enjoying nature. That's or walking right. in it.
Well, that's how science began, wasn't it? By the observation of
observation. That's right. Yes,
that's great.
Yeah, so interesting. And kids love it too. Kids love it. I used to be a teacher many years ago, and I'd give even 5 and 6 year olds, we'd go outside, you go and pick a blade of grass or a leaf or something like that and bring it inside. And then I told them to draw it, and they had to draw it really, really carefully with all the bits on, and they've got a whole hour to do it. And even a 5-year-old can do that. You know, because you've given them something to really look at carefully. And tell them it's going to take a long time. I want all the dots and everything on there.
But isn't that good? Because so much of what's around us we take for granted and we don't really focus. And I think a lot of the time that we spend on digital technology, we're being revved up and we're doing things really, really quickly. So it's not giving us time to sit and to process, to observe, to take information on board in the way that you're talking about. Yeah. So to me, it's very encouraging to think that people can build up their resilience in their bodies, and that as they do, that they can reduce the symptoms that they're experiencing to electromagnetic fields. Do you have any stories about people who've improved their resistance?
Well, one thing before I go further, there's 2 ways. So there's people who have a very strong awareness of their somatic bodily changes, and these people could almost be said to be overreacting in some ways. It's not helping them by reacting so strongly. So you could develop sensory regulation skills using breathing practices or meditation techniques, for instance, and just to help to calm the system down a little bit. You certainly don't want to lose that ability to be aware, but if it's making you hyped up, you know, and every moment there's something, you feel something bombarding you, then it's just good to try and relax the system. And so this breathing practices or meditation can help. And then there's those who lack the somatic bodily awareness, but they have signs of radio frequency compromise, for instance. They could be encouraged to develop some sensory responses so that they become aware of what's causing the symptoms that you know, and then they can take avoidance steps. So there are various embodied mindfulness practices which can be done. Now, this is the sort of field that my co-author Siobhan Reddell works in. It's absolutely right up her alley, and her patients, she's both a medical doctor and a special, she specially works in this area of working with the autonomic nervous system and building capacity and coming to terms with things that are making you too jarred or whatever, you know, all those sorts of things. It's her field. And so you can do that. And she's got many stories of patients she's helped, but I don't feel free to talk about them. And it's better to talk to her anyway.
Yes, no, that's fascinating. So really what you're saying is that everybody's on this spectrum, and depending on where you are on the spectrum, you might want to shift your position a little bit so that you're either more aware or more sensitive, less sensitive.
More or less, yes. That's not so much sensitive, but aware, to do with awareness. You're more or less aware. I don't think that we can change how sensitive our bodies are, except by building our resilience.
Yeah.
But we can help address we can address how our sensitivity with addressing the resilience and building a healthy lifestyle. We can address the responsiveness by one of these 2 ways I was talking about, to become slightly less responsive or aware, less aware, as it were, or more aware of how our body is responding, depending on where you're at on that scale. Yes, let's not call it sorry, I've forgotten what you do call it now. But it's a term used for autism, so let's forget spectrum.
Yeah, okay. We won't use that.
But yes, on that sort of scale, yes.
That's very encouraging to hear those suggestions that people can apply, and that working with the autonomic nervous system, you can actually improve your health, and you can perhaps, I don't know whether the word recover is quite the right one, but you can reduce your susceptibility to electromagnetic radiation.
By building your resilience and working through. It may need some work with a counsellor like Siobhan, but there's also things that can be done by yourself. And I think addressing those basics of sleep, exercise, and diet are the absolutely first ones, and that's an ongoing thing that's important to us all.
Well, I was about to say that it does sound like things that we could all benefit from, so that sounds like good advice. So, Mary, I wanted to ask you about the medical community. Are you getting responses from doctors, or do you expect?
I have had some responses from doctors, thanking us for this model. It's only been published a short time now, but there's already been responses from doctors thanking us, particularly doctors that are also researchers. Actually, I've got a new doctor myself who I went to for a bee sting the other day, and he was very interested to hear of my field of research because he's particularly interested in the aspect of glioblastoma. So that was very good news, very encouraging that there are some GPs becoming more aware of it and not poo-pooing it. So that's good. He's asked me to keep him informed, which is great.
Oh, that is good.
But yes, so I've had this morning a communication and yesterday from a doctor in France, but he's, I think, Greek. Several in France, they're quite onto it with the electrosensitivity. Yes, and so it's good. It's getting a good response.
That's tremendous. So that gives us a hope that there will be people that sufferers can see who will be able to help them with this expanded knowledge. So do you have any suggestions for the medical community or for individuals, Mary?
I think the main thing about the medical community is that there should be some training included in when they're training as doctors, generally doctors, but not just GPs, but in GP training too. They need to be told about this as one of the possibilities when people come to them with the typical symptoms, which are typical of many things. But this is one of the aspects they need to be aware of so as to consider it, because if they consider it, then there's other questions they can ask to try and narrow it down as to whether that's it. But if they're not even aware of it, then they're just going to say, oh, we'll try this and we'll try that and we'll try the other, which is what so many people encounter. Very frustratingly.
That's right. That reminds me of a story about a lady who was given a new cordless phone for Christmas. And soon after that, she started developing very severe headaches. And she went to her doctor, who gave her medication. And the headaches didn't get any better. And she obtained one of our meters. She measured. She was shocked to find that her cordless phone was emitting electromagnetic radiation. She didn't seem to know.
Yeah, they're quite bad, and they do it the whole time, whether they're on the thing or not.
That's right. So when she found that was the case, she stopped using the cordless phone, and magically the headaches disappeared. So the medication she'd been taking was completely irrelevant to her particular condition.
And last year I went to a little bed and breakfast in the country, which is a remote place. There's not a lot of stuff around, but I got chatting to the bloke who owned the place, and he said, there'd been something installed on a pole on his property recently, and he wasn't very happy about it. And would I come and look? It was about 300 meters from the house. It was entirely, I don't think it was even a transmitter. It was something that was a container for a wired connection. So I asked him about his house. It turned out he had a cordless phone by the bed and the computer through the wall.
Oh,
So I suggested get the cordless phone out of the bedroom, definitely as far as you can, and make sure your computer's turned off at night and see if it makes any difference. Well, that was the day I was leaving. The next day I got an email. Thank you. I've had my first good night's sleep in years. Yeah, so he's it's an easy thing. Basically, there's a rule. A lot of people worry about the base stations and stuff, but actually any individual person's highest exposure comes from their individual use of devices. The field gets so much higher as it's close to you, as you get close to the transmitter, that
yes.
if you've got, the phone on you and the laptop and the smartwatch and whatever you've got, all those things are very, very close to you. Your overall exposure will be highest from the devices you're using.
That's
Although
right.
it doesn't mean to say you won't react to very low exposures that are there the whole time outside. But
that's right. But
people just need to be aware that if they're worried about base stations, they need to be more concerned about what they're actually using themselves.
Oh, that's right.
That, because we have control over those things. We can control what we've got in our own home.
Exactly.
We can't control the base station nearly as easily, but we've got complete control over what we choose to have in our home. Yeah. You don't have control over what the neighbour's using, but you, in your own home, you can control it.
Well, that's right. But first you have to know what's there. And what we're finding now is that so many people have no idea of what radiating equipment they have in their own homes, which is a surprise because some people have said to me, I don't have anything wireless. A few people have said that to me. And then when I've gone in and measured, yes, there have been wireless devices, so they didn't know they were there. And as you say, we are finding in virtually 100% of the homes that we test that it is the personal devices, the internal sources that are causing higher exposure than
it's actually having said you can choose, actually it's getting harder to choose now because of the smart devices. So pretty much all washing machines, fridges, all appliances are now smart appliances that interact automatically with your smart, in inverted commas, meter. So it isn't actually as easy as I said to be completely rid of them, unless you've got a very old model.
Yes, I think there are still models that you can get of some things, but it comes back to us asking the questions when we're getting new appliances, doesn't it? And even better.
It's only about 3 years ago. I asked when we were getting a fridge. I asked the salesman, "Does it have Bluetooth?" And he looked at me like I was stupid. I said, "No, I mean it. Does it have Bluetooth? Is it going to communicate with my meter?" He'd never even heard of it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the trouble. A lot of salesmen haven't, but we I guess need to go to the manufacturers to get that information. What is it giving out? A signal, a radio frequency signal, and at least they should be able to answer that for us.
You can be absolutely assured if it's got the word smart in it, then it is.
Yeah. So, Mary, I think that's all the questions I have for you.
Okay.
I
think you just like to tell you a little bit about what I've been up to in the last year or two. Apart from writing this paper, I until last year when things were in lockdown, I'd really got into doing some public talking. So I'm interested in educating the public. So I've done quite a few public talks now, which is nice. And various people around New Zealand have had me go and do a public talk for their community. And so I'm hoping that really will help to spread the word. And before I go, can I go through the important basic rules?
Please do.
No screens in the bedrooms at all. And parents need to model what they expect their children to do, by the way, which parents hate hearing, of course, and so would I. But no screens in bedrooms. No phone use by or against the head. No device storage on the body or in the hand, because That's your body. It's
Yes.
radiating against your hand. It has transmitters down both sides and both ends, probably. Over 4 transmitters now. And then a serious discussion on starting ages, like nothing before the age of 1, no screen at all, including TV, or even 2, and no more than an hour up to about the age of 5, and then always, or preferably with a parent, not just as a babysitter. And after 5, there's a little more leeway, but strict restrictions on times for gaming and social networking, because those are where there are big problems for young people with addiction to gaming. And it's serious addiction that has the same effect on the brain as cocaine. And social network problems, which include severe anxiety, depression, and loneliness. It's not making them more connected, it's making them lonely. So those activities need to have quite strict restrictions on the time, maybe an hour a day.
Yes, or not even during the weekday. We know parents who said,
ideally not.
Yeah.
Ideally not, but I mean, at a maximum, it's really better not to have more than an hour a day. And actually, if you're having a full and varied lifestyle that's recommended for children with the amount of activity and outdoor time, there won't be time for it anyway.
That's right. There are better things for them to be doing. There are better things for us all to be doing. But I think a lot of that comes back to, or those very sensible suggestions of yours, come back to actually thinking about what we're doing and not just saying, oh, here's a mobile phone. My child needs calming. Let me give my mobile phone to my child to keep my child occupied. There are other things that you can be giving to your kids or doing with your kids to keep them occupied. So don't just go for the easy answer, because kids don't actually need mobile phones for quite a few years. For, I would say, maybe the first, certainly until they're teenagers. There would be very few cases.
I think Russia still recommends 18.
Yes.
I don't think they listen to it, but I think that's what Russia's still recommending.
Yeah. That's right. Well,
but at least not till high school.
Yeah, and not make the assumption that every child should have this technology, because I think one of the things that we need to realize is that the reason we think that children need mobile phone technology is that the mobile phone industry ran out of adults to sell their mobile phones to. So children became a lucrative market. So the advertising that we see and the message that we're getting online for our kids to use this technology is not because it's good for them or that they need it. It's because it provides a market to the industry.
It was originally invented for business purposes.
Yes, exactly.
It was a business tool.
That's right. Yeah, so I think if we're just a bit more conscious about this technology and use it a bit more wisely, then we might have healthier lifestyles.
I think that in terms of families, which is where I have a really primary concern, is the key, if at all possible, for those who it's not too late, start before they ever have a device with the learning the good, sensible rules about use and making a family, having a family agreement about, of older children, having a family agreement about what's allowed and what isn't. There's a very good website, the American Psychological Association, I think it is. They have a tool for making a family agreement timetable of who's going to be allowed to use what for how long each day, and the kids can get to choose with the parents, if they're old enough to take part in it. That way they own it more.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. So I'm sure people who are listening to this can Google that and find that tool.
Yeah, I hope so. All right, well, I think that said, I might go for a walk.
Sounds like a great thing to do, Mary. Thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely talking to you. And
You're welcome.
I'm very excited about this new paper of yours. So please let me know how things continue in this direction and what response you're getting from.
Thank you. Unfortunately, as I say, I can't put it free online, but I have got it, the accepted manuscript, which is not properly formatted, but it's all the same words and figures, on my LinkedIn page. So if your listeners are on LinkedIn, they can find it on there.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Mary.
All right.
Have a
Thank
lovely
you.
afternoon. It was lovely to talk to you.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.